Hey everybody, I'm CJ, and this article sort of caught my attention. I don't usually have a whole lot of affection for Screen Rant. I kind of regard this website as being just sort of a bottom feeding type of website. There's usually not a whole lot of stuff on here that's worth commenting on, but this seemed worth commenting on. So, anyway, basically, just to kind of establish my own bona fides, I never was a big Star Wars EU kind of fan. Um, there are a handful of decent offerings from the old school EU. The new like Disney EU, I couldn't even tell you about. I haven't read any of that stuff, like exactly zero. But the OG EU, that I would say I'm kind of familiar with, especially the novels and whatnot. Less so the comics, and practically none at all with video games, but definitely the novels. And one of the things that you're going to learn real quick reading the OG Star Wars EU is that the OG Star Wars EU kind of sucks. It's just an inescapable reality. For every good, and I mean like really good, EU novel that comes along, there's going to be something like five or six or seven courtships of Princess Leia's type books where from start to finish, it's like the entire book is just one big bag of what the fuck. And so, honestly, the at least for me, your actual mileage may vary, but at least for me, pickings are really pretty slim when it comes to the Star Wars EU. But one of the things that is undeniably awesome about the EU, without question, is Shadows of the Empire. And it's basically this story that takes place between Empire and Jedi that basically fills in some of the blanks with it. Where did Leia get that bounty hunter outfit? Shadows of the Empire answers that question. Where did Luke get his green lightsaber from? Shadows of the Empire answers that question. How did Luke's mastery over the Force increase so much between Empire and Jedi? Shadows of the Empire answers. I mean, it answers a lot of questions, is the point. And for me, to this day, it's one of those standout elements of the EU that I can point back to and say, you know what, maybe not everything was gold, but every once in a while you'd get something like Shadows of the Empire. And so, one of the things that I mean, let's face it, probably most people have noticed is that the Shadows of the Empire has definitely undergone a little bit of a reappraisal in this post SJW situation that we're all living in. And as far as these SJWs are concerned, Shadows of the Empire has been weighed in the balance and found wanting. And so there are not very many people in the SJW community who lament the fact that Shadows of the Empire has basically been reduced to Legends status. It's not even that kind of soft canon that the EU used to occupy in the larger Star Wars universe, where George Lucas is ready, willing, and able to contradict any of this stuff the moment doing so suits his agenda. That was really the game that was being played with the EU, even back in Shadows of the Empire's day. And a good example of that, by the way, is Shadows of the Empire itself, where this is definitely a book that's based upon the 1997 special edition of the Star Wars trilogy. And as a result, the book kicks off with the scene of Darth Vader and the Emperor making contact with each other. Their dialogue comes directly from the original version of Empire, whereas the 2004 version of Empire changes their dialogue and even changes the actor playing the Emperor. This is based on that original version. So, again, Lucas always had the freedom and the willingness to contradict things as he needed to, but in the main, this did definitely pass the squint test. This could have been a movie by itself that bridges the gap between Empire and Jedi. And like I say, it has been reevaluated by the SJWs. And there are certain, really, there are two main things that they seem to want to fixate upon. The first of which is Dash Rendar, and basically the issue there is basically Dash himself. He's first off, he's just kind of a Han Solo carbon copy because of the fact that Han was encased in carbonite during the runtime of Shadows of the Empire. You kind of need a Han Solo figure to serve Han Solo's purpose, and obviously Han Solo himself was in no position to do that. So in comes Dash Rendar. There's he's not. It's not that he's a. I always thought that it was kind of unfair to categorize Dash Rendar as a clone of Han Solo, but it's like at the same time, you you kind of have to acknowledge that they serve very different, or rather, very similar functions in the different stories that they appear in. They are interchangeable in that way. The other thing is that the shoulder pad design and this dipshit writer, uh, he says in reference to Dash Rendar, he basically says basically what Han Solo would look like if he'd been created by Rob Liefeld, complete with massive shoulder pads. And that was really a bow. The shoulder pads. That was really a bow in the direction of appeasing the video game designers. The reason that they needed that is because the design for Dash Rendar, it was just so bulky and clunky. Video game technology of that time really didn't allow for Dash Rendar to be rendered the way he had been rendered without basically solid objects passing through each other. So that's going to happen no matter what. And there really wasn't the enough. It may have been technically possible to prevent that from happening in the video game, but there really wasn't. At the very least, there wasn't time to do that kind of work. So the shoulder pads are basically designed to obscure that, hide the solid objects passing through each other, so that the video game design of Dash Rendar is just less distracting. So yes, I admit it is kind of a goofy design, but when you understand the purpose behind the shoulder pads, it actually makes a lot more sense. So there's that. But there is another element here, far bigger than Dash Rendar, that most people look back at and say, yeah, that's not a good look-sees. And guys, we live in this post-Me Too era where consent is, I mean, not only is it sacrosanct, but it's like it's kind of arbitrary. Like, what is the definition of consent? And we start getting into some of the gray areas of that here in this article. Basically, this dipshit writer, he even says the word. He says that Shadows of the Empire's Leia plot is problematic. And basically, one of the villains of Shadows of the Empire is Prince Shizor. He's a crime lord. He's basically like the Star Wars version of Kingpin, where there's his criminal life and then there's his public life. And most people don't realize that one of the wealthiest people that anyone's ever heard of is secretly a crime boss. Right? I would compare it to the Kingpin in that way. And one of the abilities that Prince Shizor has, just by virtue of the species he comes from, is that he has the ability to release pheromones that make him irresistible to women. And so, in a certain kind of way, he is sort of like the date rape villain of the Star Wars universe. And it's established, not shown, thank God, but it is established in the story that once he turns on the pheromones, it's basically impossible for a woman to resist him. So, any story that starts off by making a promise like that, you can pretty much figure that by the end of the story, somebody is going to have his pheromones turned on for them, and they're going to say thanks, but no thanks. And that's pretty much what happens with Leia in this story. Shizor tries to seduce her, and she resists. And this is one of those things that makes me think that the dipshit writer of this article, he never did anything more than just read the Wikipedia entry for Shadows of the Empire, because if you've read the book, you know that, yeah, Shizor tried something, but Leia effectively told him, piss off. This isn't, yeah, there's a little bit more to it than that, I understand, but basically, it is accurate to say Prince Shizor tried to seduce Leia. He used his pheromones to do so, and it didn't work. That's what happened. And this dipshit writer never actually says that it did happen. He never says that Shizor is successful in seducing Leia, but he goes right up to the precipice of saying it. And I think a lot of people who haven't read Shadows of the Empire, they would read this and think that Leia basically got raped, and that is not what happens in the story. He says, uh, there is the single most controversial element of Shadows of the Empire, its treatment of Princess Leia. The dynamic between Leia and Shizor was never supposed to be an innocent one, with the Faline prince using his pheromones to arouse Leia so she can only be compared to an animal in heat. But society has progressed since the 90s, and now this twisted relationship feels disturbingly familiar, akin to the powerful men who have been exposed by the hashtag #MeToo movement. Shizor is essentially a sexual predator whose power strips women of their ability to consent, and consequently, his conquests are little more than the twisted actions of a rapist. This is even more disturbing given Leia is the target of his affections, the one who is stripped of her confidence and strength of will by Shizor's pheromones. Leia is a feminist icon and blah 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 blah. Unfortunately, there is no such strength in Shadows of the Empire because Shizor's pheromones literally wipe it away. Leia deserves better than this. And if you, it makes me think, or actually, it makes me very sure that this dipshit writer, like I say, hasn't actually read this story. He read the Wikipedia, or somebody told him about it, or something like that. He misunderstood something, and so this is the end result of it. But there's no rational way to read this book and assume that something happened between Shizor and Leia, because the book goes to great pains to show that Leia fought back. Now, she ended up still being his prisoner, but the point is, Shizor at least didn't win that particular battle, if you know what I mean. And this is the state of affairs with SJWs. They don't care about facts. They don't care about um, context. They don't care because, I mean, guys, even if this, yes, this, I guess in a certain kind of sense, especially by modern standards, Shizor is a rapist, but this fact is not celebrated in the book. He is clearly the villain of the piece, and this isn't something uh, that the writer, Steve Perry, presents as an honorable character trait for Prince Shizor. He's basically presented as being what he is. I mean, the guy's just a real scumbag. I mean, yeah, there's an elegance and a sophistication to his methods and everything, but the point of scenes like this with Leia is to show that when you strip away the wealth and the power and hobnobbing with the Emperor and with Vader and all that, when you take all that away from Shizor, at the end of the day, he's just another criminal. Now, it doesn't matter how rich he is or how powerful he is or how big his company is or any of that other stuff. At the end of the day, he's just a criminal. And that's the whole point of it. And with SJWs, you need to understand that for some things, context is completely irrelevant. Context does not matter. And in this case, it doesn't matter that Prince Shizor is not depicted as morally laudable in any shape, form, or fashion in the book. It doesn't matter that it matters least of all that he's unsuccessful in seducing Leia. The only thing that matters is that he's basically a rapist. And context be damned, storylines be damned, characters be damned. The guy's a rapist, and this is problematic. And this is the state of affairs with the SJWs. It's like, for me, I can read Shadows of the Empire and kind of lament the fact that it's no longer in canon, whereas SJWs, they read it and they're secretly glad. They're secretly happy, you know. Or in fact, maybe not even secretly. In this case, he's actually fiendishly gleeful that this amazing story that really did a lot to fill in the gaps of story, of character, of everything. Could have been a movie in its own right. It no longer exists in canon in any respect because one of the bad guys in the story is basically a rapist. And this is simplistic SJW thinking. I can't say at its finest, but probably at its most transparent. So, as for me, I'm always going to love Shadows of the Empire. I'm always going to regard this as an amazing Star Wars story. Anyway, I'm CJ, and that's that. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, make sure you're still subscribed, comment, like, and share this video because it really helps me out. Also, you can find me on Twitter at Cole Loves Comics.